What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Brian and myself are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Alberto Núñez, and we are going to be talking around going from advanced to elite. Last week's episode with Brian and myself, we talked about going from intermediate to an advanced, and now we figured it would be a great time to bring on someone who is elite in terms of getting jacked and looking really, really good at it, and bring in Berto to help fill some gaps and just provide insight that Brian and myself do not yet have experience in. So with that, we are going to dig into a lot of things with Berto. I'm going to have Berto introduce himself. And the reason for that is I am always hesitant because I don't want to say things, that maybe someone doesn't maybe want. And I literally just came off of a podcast where someone introduced me and pulled some stuff off my website that I forgot was up there. And I was all kind of cringy, oh yeah, I need to definitely go update that. So the last thing I want to do is introduce someone else with things that they may not want said about them. So Berto, can you please give everyone a brief introduction before we jump into our updates?
Yeah, so next month is my 23-year anniversary, of training, of strength training. And man, if I could have started even earlier, but there were so many chances that I didn't jump on. So, started as something that I wanted to do just to hang out with a friend, and then after the first month, I was hooked. I came back to school over the summer. I was making really fast gains then because I remember I came back after the summer and everyone's like, whoa, dude, what happened? And I thought it'd be kind of a phase, to be quite honest, but it was one of those things where it's like, hey, I'd go do my research, apply it, see it help, would do the back and forth. So it really, I guess, spoke to the nerd side of me. And I liked that, there was things I could do outside of training to make my training better. And I loved the fact that training didn't lie. I felt like with other sports, I could get away with, if I'm just really competitive the day of and I refuse to lose, good things can happen. But with training, it's like, hey, if you miss a week, you're not going to jump up a few pounds, a few reps. So long story short, I was a concurrent athlete for a long time. Eventually, sports ran out. I'm like, all right, going to do this bodybuilding thing. Fully committed 4 years after strength training. And yeah, man, things got a little carried away. Got my pro card as a drug-free bodybuilder. I was about 23, 24. Just freshly into that advanced phase, I guess I'd say. And and honestly, the majority of my gains were made ages 20 to 23. It was this 3-year span. And now I am here where it's crazy because I feel I have this talk with my athletes all the time that, if you're saying intermediate, because that's the majority of them, it's really hard to backtrack to lose muscle. And gains are slower, but they're still pretty predictable. And now it has gotten to the point where, I've tried certain training interventions over the years once I was an advanced athlete where if it was just the wrong choice, I guess, I could backslide. I've had years where, and so that's just what happens when you're that close to your ceiling. It's very easy to backtrack, and then it's super hard to take a step in the right direction. And that whole research side where you're trying to figure out what your next plan is going to be, what can I do to keep myself progressing, that becomes so much more important now, so much more important. And I almost feel now they're two completely different hobbies, because you spend so much time on the nerding out relative to the training, or at least it seems like that for me. So yeah, kind of at that point now where it's man, it's just hard. And if I were to tell the average person how much time I spend training, and I were to show them 2 pictures, this is what I got from that, they would think I'm crazy and probably suggest I go find something else to do with my time.
I love that. That's hilarious. I love the way you frame that up. No, cause I fully relate, man. I know Aaron does too. And, you said you're going to be 23 years into training next month. I will be 25 years into training next month. But when you started, since we're about the same age, I think when you started, you were probably like 17. So you were probably already like well into this puberty thing, right? Yeah. Got quick results. I remember my first 2 years, I almost didn't change at all because I was still like this prepubescent little boy. But then same thing right around like 17, 18, it was like, oh, okay, now it's working. So maybe that also speaks to a little bit of our like genetic predisposition for this thing. Okay. So real quick, jump into some updates here. I just have three, and then we'll get right back to life with Berto. Dieting things are continuing to fluctuate, unfortunately, for really no reason. My calories are the same. Activity is mostly the same. Not eating any different foods that are hard to track or anything like that. And the scale hit its low 4 or 5 days ago, and it just keeps climbing since then. I'm now 2 pounds up from my low 4 days ago, and I really don't know why. Usually I do. So we'll just see how things are going to continue going. I'm going to stick with the same calories for 2 more days. And if the scale doesn't figure its shit out, I'm probably going to have to slice 300 calories or so and move forward from there. My metabolic cycle is finally wrapping up. This is week 5, and I am very ready to get back to normal hypertrophy training things. I will have a full update on the new cycle construction and everything on our next episode when we don't have a guest. And then the last update, which I think is somewhat relevant to Berto and to this conversation, is I just had a session at N1 with Cass, and anytime we're there, I like to, at least take an opportunity to ask him some of the pressing questions that are on my brain. And so one of the things that we brought up was in regards to pull-arounds and a Q&A that he had on his story, where someone was like, how can I lengthen overload the lat? And Cass wrote pull-arounds, and then he wrote something along the lines of like, and he wrote a bunch of these other techniques like 1.5 reps or reverse drop sets or partials and stuff like that. So I was always under this impression that pull-arounds are not a lengthened overloaded movement. They are merely a movement that trains the lat at a long muscle length. So I asked him about this. And he kind of like, tongue in cheek was like, yeah, if you have these machines, you can overload the lat or whatever. But then he was like, but you could do this. And he was talking about something I hadn't done before. And it's just kind of silly. I haven't, because I do know about reverse drop sets and partials and all these things. But he was like, what if you just stayed in the pull around after you failed and you did partials there, or you did a reverse drop set in the pull around? Because what I usually do is I shift out of the pull around. So like in a pull around, you're lengthening the lat across the body. What I usually do is I shift out of the pull around once I fail, and I kind of shift my hips forward, and I continue accruing reps due to mechanical advantage. He suggested I stay in the pull around and do a reverse drop set in the pull around. So essentially the lat is being lengthened, at its lengthened position, that the lengthened overload is occurring. So I thought that was pretty cool, and something I think I'm definitely going to include into like the latter weeks of my next cycle. And then, the other thing I got to ask him about was my idea of doing same muscle group supersets. Instead of doing, what he calls duration sets, but they're essentially like 15 to 20 rep sets that you would use in a metabolic phase. And I was like, 15 to 20 rep sets, they just don't do a lot for me. I feel like I'm wasting a ton of time in the first 10 reps. So, what would be your thoughts on like a same muscle group superset instead, where you can go 6 to 10 reps and then immediately into another exercise for 6 to 10 reps? And this would be for metabolic purposes. It would go either short, or it would go lengthen short. But you would make sure the shortened movement is the one absorbing the majority of the fatigue at the end. And he thought that was basically the same thing. I mean, he said there are subtle differences, but he kind of co-signed on it. It was like, yeah, that totally works. So, I really like that because I hate those 15 to 20 rep sets anyways. And this kind of validates something that, maybe was a bias for me anyways. But those are my big updates for the day. And, let's pass it over to Berto. What's going on in your world?
Man, I just got back from like the most, I guess, anti-bodybuilding days I've had in quite a while. And there was a purpose to that. I think prep starts today. I think today I might start my actual contest prep diet. So, it was like the nice little empty the tank, put yourself in a position where you miss your routine, like sort of deal, and yeah, so I'm starting a week early. I couldn't help it no more. It was one of those things where I'm like, well, like I have that boxing fight that I want to see this Saturday. It's probably early on in the prep, early enough where I can still have, a little bit of tequila or something like that, and, enjoy that day and move on. And also a kid who is just here in town, and I've kind of taken him under my wing. It's his 21st birthday, so I'm like, I'm gonna buy you your first beer, but we'll find a way to fit that in. But I'm very excited, man. I haven't prepped since 2017, and just those athletic deadlines, man. Like it's crazy. I know how my life is gonna be from now until November, and man, there's just a sweet spot with a contest prep where your life and everything else you do gets better until it eventually, well, yeah, it doesn't. But you're just so organized in order to make time for bodybuilding. I also feel that being that we're humans and it's like, hey, we're not very big, we're strong. Like when your body thinks it's starving, it's like, well, we need to figure this out. So sometimes I feel like there's like some rewiring that goes on in your head, and it's like you get smarter for a brief instant. Like some of my best ideas have come like in between meals, right? So I can't wait, man. It's gonna be a good time. I'm 39, so I still have plenty of time, but it becomes quite clear at a certain point that, man, everything does come to an end. So I plan to really, really enjoy this one.
I really, really
That's
like
awesome.
that.
I really want to dig into some of the. Yeah, I just want to dig into some of the contest prep stuff as we get later on into this as part of the process of becoming elite. But yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
What I wanted to say is I really, really like how you frame that is like, I have this now goal that takes me X amount of months, right? Like 6+ months. And you're just framing it up as that. And I really, really resonate with that because for me, the past, my training has been on the back burner for the last handful of months because business has been my priority. The interesting thing there is for me, the physical pursuit is much more, I think it's easier because it's like I can endure the physical discomfort much better. Like I enjoy the really hard training sessions, but when I need to solve these business problems or problems of myself and my, mental, limitations, those are very uncomfortable in a bad way. Whereas the training is uncomfortable in a good way because I know that when I do this, it produces X. So I definitely really, really resonate with that. And then I actually have a short update me. I have a bunch of travel coming up starting in 2 days. I will be in between Cancun and then Miami, Dubai, and ultimately landing in Bali over the next 7 or 8 days. And I am going to be very, very excited once I'm there to reintegrate into routine, prioritize training again. I'm going to pick up a coach and stuff like that again. I just operate so much better. I make so much decision making for everyone else's diet and training and all of that stuff. When it comes to myself, I just know I just put myself on the back burner and I just won't get prioritized. So I know by putting skin in the game, by investing my dollars into someone else's coaching, it just brings out a much more adherent version of myself. And then too, I get to learn things, right? I always like hiring different coaches because I get to take little pieces of what they're doing and ultimately, from an ego standpoint, make sure that what I'm doing is better than what they're doing. So I always just love it from that standpoint as well. But yeah, not a lot of updates. I need to pack. I need to get my shit together real fast because in under 48 hours, I leave the country for the next 5 months. So need to make sure I have all my shit.
Yeah, and me and Aaron, we're going to have to figure out a new time to podcast, man. 10 a.m. Mountain Time is no longer going to work.
Yeah, that will be I think midnight or 1 a.m., whatever the name of the time is over there.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Cool. Well, that's awesome. First thing I think as we start this conversation is probably important to get some of Berto's working definitions for what might describe like an intermediate and advanced and an elite person, just on like a very basic level, how you think of that. Do you use like rate of progression as something to help you along the way there? Or what would be kind of basic ways you would think about those three levels?
Yeah, I think the person's relative rate of progression is probably the best way to decipher it. And, of course, there's unique situations. Or like in your case, once you started to hit puberty, it's like you're a beginner again, even though maybe you were consistent enough where you're starting to get some shades of intermediate, but hey, right? 17 happened and life was good again. And yeah, so the beginner phase should be quite rapid. Like I remember once I kind of figured that it worked that way. I remember this was like 10 years ago. He was a 17-year-old boy or 18. And I remember I got him to a 500-pound deadlift like in 8 months of training. Because we took a very like linear elbow grease type of approach. So that sorts out quite quickly, I think. And then the intermediate, you guys know how that is. Like you can stay there a bit longer than you'd like. But the same thing with like the early stages of being advanced. Like you can kind of, find yourself in that first leg, just doing the whole treadmill thing. So most people kind of end up in one place or the other, and just kind of bottleneck themselves there. It's either in the intermediate or the early advanced. I just think when it gets, I think. Here's the crazy part is like I know a lot of, won't say names, but like drug-free bodybuilders who I legit think they are still in the early end of their advanced phase, but they are just so genetically well endowed that it looks like a world-class athlete, and they just haven't been challenged enough to want to do anything about it. And for a number of different reasons, they've never really stopped to think about like, okay, how can I make this even better? I have, 4 or 5 world championships, so I'm just going to keep writing this thing. So I think something that's important to note is it's going to look very different on everyone. A few years ago, I had this one athlete, Smiley Elmore Jr., and I am pretty sure that when that man was 16, he had more muscle on his frame than like I'll ever have. So he ended up being a D1 running back. I think he was backing up Barry Sanders back in the day, and then blew out his knees and was done. But yeah, just freaky, well muscled, and I'm pretty sure when I got Smiley, like he was probably like early advanced, maybe late intermediate, because there was some things that conflicted in the way he trained prior to me getting him. So it looks very different on everyone, and most people just kind of end up in their little happy place and just float around there until they're done with this.
No, that was like very similar to what we were talking about at the end or not at the end on last week's episode. It was like things kind of work until they don't work, and for some of those people who never make that transition, it's like they kind of falsely believe that like, oh well, I already know everything, and just the exploration kind of stops progressing, and that is what kind of stops the progression, is because they stop exploring type thing.
Yeah, exploration was the word that we kept focusing on last week, and how like to get from intermediate to advanced, at least, you really have to be open to exploring things that may not perfectly fit into like what you think is your comfort zone, right? So maybe you get outside of that comfort zone and you try things that might be better than what you're comfortable with. And those people you mentioned are perfect examples, because like, I mean, man, you can look at any professional football player that plays like linebacker or any of those positions, and you're just like, you literally do clean and jerks and squat and bench press, and your physique would already win like 13 different competitions. Imagine if you like learn how to do things a little more optimally. So I fully agree with that too. One of the other kind of big things that Actually, let's backtrack a little. So as we kind of move into now this idea of going into being elite from being advanced, what do you think are some of the big overarching things that would someone would need to take into account to make that leap?
Well, I think you have to. I mean, you have to be a curious person, man. You know, I mentioned, like that. I feel like I have two different hobbies. Like there's I go in there and train, because when I go in there and train, I legit put on my athlete cap on, and then when I am nerding out, like that is almost a different hobby. So, like you just need to be that curious. You need to be that open. And so I guess for me, like I've always had this love for the sciences, especially biology. So this just, yeah, this was like the perfect sport for me, for sure. So yeah, I think that's the big thing is you just need to be curious. You need to be open-minded and really have it keep you up at night about like all the things that you might be doing right now that aren't necessarily optimal. But at the same time, like once you're at the gym, it's like forget about those voices and like just really get to work with the same sort of enthusiasm that you had earlier on when you knew that, hey, a month from now I'll be doing all sorts of like brand new shit in the gym. So yeah, yeah. So there's that one part of me, I guess, is trying to be as enlightened as possible, and then I also feel that there's that part of me that once I'm in the gym and it's like go time, I'm like bro with the cut shirt and the nipple hanging out, like sort of mode.
Yep. Aaron, anything to say, brother?
So this is more of a question to kind of steer it potentially a little bit. So one thing I know that I wouldn't say I struggle with, that I always try and keep an open mind to, is some of the information emerging around like research on, bodybuilding pursuits, muscle, kind of fat loss thing. And there is this kind of a consistent thought that I have whenever I see something and I'm like, I want to know what the population that this study was done on. Like, do I fit in that population? Or so that I kind of wanted to kick that over to you, Berto, is like knowing that you have achieved, you're in the upper echelon of what many lifters will achieve. So when, research comes out, or do you ever find that maybe your approach isn't quite as heavily influenced by it because that this research may have been on your 20-year-old college student who's only put on 10 pounds of muscle and that sort of thing. So that's something that I personally kind of, I wouldn't say struggle with, but I'm always like, I don't know if I'm willing to, not necessarily, I don't want to use the word believe because I don't want to make it seem like I don't believe in science, but is this should this be extrapolated to people who are on the fringes of that study that was performed on?
Yeah, man. No, I think in your case, you just guess you're just very familiar with all the limitations, and when you said that, what came to mind for me was the fact that you can take, I don't know, 20 people who I'm training, and they're all so different. They're all so different. You'll have some people who legit, like I had a guy a few years ago who, like, he was an outlier in a negative way, where I'm like, man, it's like we gain weight, it's all fat. We lose weight, it's like you lose muscle. It's like, what is going on here? So just, I guess, the vast differences between people, like it's so unique, it's so different. That puts me a little bit at, like, yeah. It's just, I have to be aware of the limitations. I think another one, and this is something that I was thinking about the other day, because hey, like phones are like out like in everywhere, right? It's like, how come they don't record the research they're doing? Like, it's such low hanging fruit. It's like, let me see what these people were doing and how they were doing such set interventions. It wouldn't take that long, like you could have it out in the cloud somewhere, and if you want to dig through this paper, you can look at how they did their lat pull down. So there's just a lot to be left, like when it comes to our research, which is good, which is great, because I feel like it's yet to fully hit its stride. Like I look at it 10 years ago and I'm like, wow, like that's what we had to work with. But I guess I find comfort in the fact that you're in the trenches experience, so long as you supplement it with a good understanding of, what science is doing to help us get better. I always feel like I'm a step ahead, I guess, of like both sides, like the gym bro with like 30 years of experience, and all those nerds we love to follow. So, which I was thinking about that the other day. It's like, man, all the guys I get information from, like if I were to tell the average early 20 something, like, oh, this is the guy I'd be hitting up when I have a question here, they'd be like, like that Charles Glass, bro, right? That's probably what his suggestion would be. So yeah, there's definitely limitations to it, but I think as long as you're well aware of what they are, and I think for us, like it helps that not only do we get to work like on our own car, but we're working on all these other people's cars as well. But nevertheless, it's a fun time to be around. Like this is it's only gotten better when it comes to the nerd in me being quenched relative to, I guess, the athlete that just wants to like improve, like basically from session to session. And at this point, that's nowhere near a possibility. But at least that side, like it's getting pretty dope. Like think about it 5 years ago, like and it just goes to show you just how this is what us as humans like we're meant to do. In that, as much as our bodies, our physiques, have really started to slow down in regards to the rate at which they progress. Like I go back 5 years ago and I'm like, man, but I've made so many like strides up here. So I'm glad I have, I guess, that option when it comes to this hobby, because very few sports offer something like that.
Yeah, it sounds like individualization is kind of an important piece of making that leap. So, so you've obviously done a bit of this, and I'm familiar with your journey. You and I have had the pleasure of being at the N1 together and training together a few times. So I've been able to see kind of some of the things that you've done in your training to individualize to you, which is probably a combination of knowing your body, but also wanting to experiment and get outside of that comfort zone that we referenced earlier, which would be kind of one of those tenets that's important to make that leap. So, we know we have the changes or some of the things you've implemented in exercise selection, exercise execution, some of the stuff that the research has been saying about the lengthened overload movements, which, I referenced in the beginning in my updates and stuff like that. So, what can you discuss just briefly kind of some of the things that you've instituted into your training, what you've found, and yeah, just kind of curious on all that.
I go back, and it's crazy how far one can go doing all sorts of things that aren't necessarily correct, but they're good enough. And as long as you're consistent with it, because I feel that, man, I had a pro-worthy physique by the time I was 23, because I remember I just got on this hot streak where I'm like, all right, for the next few years, I'm not going to miss a meal. Like I'm not going to do what most people in this like age bracket do. I'm never going to miss a scheduled training session. And that's exactly what I did for 3 years. And there's a lot of things that I got wrong. Like I go back and brutal, man. But I was consistent. I trained hard, and I trained with a lot of like just vigor and optimism, which I do think is just it's that important. Yeah, so it's crazy how that worked, and then afterwards it started to get a bit harder. I started to get to the point where, you know how it goes. You start this up, the whole nerding out side of the sport, and I was perhaps just mixing in too many things complicating it a bit too much and kind of losing my athlete's edge, if you will. And I had a lot of phases where, yeah, I'd compare this season to that season. I'm like, oh man, like you don't have that pop, and and then it's the next season. It's like, okay, well, you regained it, but then I don't know, you lost muscle. So there was always something to work, like always something to work on, and new problems come up once you do become advanced. And finally, I've gotten it to the point where, okay, I feel decently like enlightened. Like I've mastered, the dieting side. Well, I can't say mastered. It's just a lot better. The training side, like a lot of similar interventions to yourself, Brian, where like I thought about it. I'm like, man, my quads, I've never really challenged them like through like the lengthened position, like ever. And I could say that for a lot of my muscle groups, or at least not the way we have been of late. So like that gets me excited. And I feel like it has made a significant difference, to the point where I might have added some weight to my contest body weight. Of course, now the issue becomes that like these adaptations are, I guess, so advanced for me that like now that I'm dieting, it's like, well, are they going to stick around the way the muscle stuck around the last time when you weren't nearly as close to your ceiling? And so there's always something to work on, man. But I think this last off season, if there is something that I feel just worked amazingly well, was just really, really putting those muscles in those lengthened positions. Because I think especially for me, given my proportions where it's like I'm 5'9", 5'10", but I'm a stubbier person, I feel that sometimes it's if that's not my intentions, like it's hard to put myself in set positions. So so there's that. What else? What else? What else? I feel if there's one thing that maybe this last off season I could have added a little bit of, is probably a little bit more of just working on my baseline strength levels, because every time I do that, like I do see some pretty neat changes. But yeah, that's been my thing. I kind of, especially with the upper body, just like using my rib cage to kind of pull those muscles around has been just amazing. And for me, like I think it's been like a year. I probably, when I compare it to my intermediate phase, it's like, hey, I made the amount of progress that I used to make like in a month, which again, to a lot of people is going to sound crazy, but like I'm quite satisfied with that. Like if I could at this stage in 1 year's time make the same sort of progress that I could make when I was 20 in a month, it's like we're doing well, and that's enough.
Aaron?
No, I have nothing on the back end of that. I agree with a lot of it.
Cool. So you've spent the last year basically specializing on delts and arms, right?
Yeah. Delts and arms. Those were the.
How has that volume been compared to like if you weren't specializing?
You know what? I think with the volume, like it is my quest now to like really condense it. Like I was thinking about this yesterday. It's like, man, it's like if you can, using other sports as analogies here, it's like, hey, if you can sit out the fourth quarter, because it's like, hey, you got your 30 points and your team, we won, we're done, like that's it. Like that's not a bad place to be. So I feel that a lot of these new things we've been doing, that's exactly what they've done for my training, because just it's what's been going on over the last year or so, where the amount of volume that I started this phase with compared to now, I'm probably using about 70% of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point I got it near to the point where I cut it in half. And I think, again, like speaking of bottlenecks, right, like I think guys have been training for a very long time, I think they kind of lose their excitement, like their romance, like they they're not in the gym all wide-eyed, and hopeful the way they were when they first started this. But I think I lost my train of thought, because I think that one is so important. It's just like being able to, I remember in math class, like sitting down and like missing notes because I was like visualizing kicking back like my dumbbell presses. So, so I think that one is super important. But yeah, getting back to the arm training, it's like the other bottleneck is going to be joints. So if I can figure out a way where, hey, I can get the stimulus that is appropriate for me and save myself a ton of reps and sets, I'm going to take that, because 10 years from now, I want to be in a similar position to now, maybe a little bit worse, where it's like, man, like, how do I get this thing moving again? Because I want to take it to that even next level.
Do you think that doing specialization type training cycles is kind of going to be par for the course at an elite level? Like at an elite level, is almost everybody going to have some body part that they feel like they need to bring up, or like, is that the right approach, do you think?
I think it was for me the right approach, because it really let me isolate these things that I wanted to apply to my training, and just really like zero in on, okay, is it going to work? And then also from just like it's the intensity and the focus that I guess I train my arms with. Like and shoulders. It's just a little different from what I do, say, for my quads or my back even. So I think, because some of that stuff feels scary, man. Like some of your training, once you become more advanced, and especially like once you're doing like a lot of work in the lengthened position, at least to me, it's like the sets feel different. They almost feel, there's less systematic fatigue, but there's that signaling that I thought at some point, like, you just get rid of, right? It's like you take an average person and put them on the leg extension. It's like they stop when it starts to burn, because this is weird, this is bad, like, right? Because legit, your body feels like it's being attacked, and like that's straight up what it feels like to me when I use those sort of training strategies. Like there's some sort of like there's not that localized pain or burn that I think people think of when they think of like pumping arms, but it's more so like there is like some anxiety that's like building up, I don't know, like in my tricep and brain, and like they're like, we need to get out of this position. So yeah, I think for me, just from a mental fatigue, it's like giving me just, okay, just work on this, and experiment like with this part of your training. It really, really helped me zero in on like what was working and what wasn't.
Yeah, we talk a lot about kind of the acute nature of achieving a stimulus without bringing with it all of the systemic fatigue, right? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is like the ability to grind through reps and go super slow. Like I've seen you at lateral raises, like actually taking 5-6 seconds to get through a concentric on your lateral raise. Whereas an earlier version of us, or at least me, I would have just used a little bit of momentum so that I wouldn't have to deal with that incredible pain of grinding through a 6-second concentric. But by doing so, I'm then including all of these other peripheral muscle groups, and instead of keeping it localized, which, even though it feels harder in the moment, I believe has a less of a systemic effect long term on the workout.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're less tapped out afterwards, so you're almost like more willing to do that again, because you're like, okay, yeah, it's kind of feels bad, but like I'm not cranky or moody or just completely like out of it after a training session.
Yep. Aaron, do you want to jump into some nutrition stuff here?
Yeah, well, we can. The one thing I did want to say though is that you just explained, Brian, is like such a great like micro representation of exactly what we're talking about. Like that intermediate person, when they get to the end of the dumbbell lateral raises, like they're going to just swing them up or whatever to get to the reps. But like having the like mental fortitude, understanding, and wherewithal to like, no, I need to create, I need to restrict or contain my proper posture and positioning to grind out this rep with just using the medial head of my delt, as the primary mover. Like those sorts of things are like those micro representations of your exploration has improved, your understanding has improved, you're going to, into pushing into that advanced or whatever level. So, I thought it was just really, really great example.
And I don't know about you guys, but a lot of it for me is just like the pride in knowing that like I'm doing good work, that I am doing it well. Like to me, that is almost as satisfying as the results that I might get from the effort. Is just the fact that I guess I'm like respecting like the muscle building gods of sorts, right?
Yeah. No, fully. I like that a lot. And then also just to bring back one point that just repopped back into my head is you were talking about, losing the romance with it earlier. And I think that a lot of this new stuff that we've been implementing into our training over the last year or two has really allowed us to kind of ignite that fire and the excitement with training. Cause every day I'm going in and I'm like, man, I wonder if like I can add another rep here or try this movement or improve my technique here or, a reverse drop set. This is so new and exciting, like more opportunity for gains, And so same thing. I see a lot of my high school, college self in the way that my mind will wander as I'm like going for walks or even sitting there doing work. And I'm like, why am I thinking about like a reverse drop set on cable rows right now? It's like, go do work, but it does help ignite that fire and keep you passionate.
No, and with you, that picture you threw up the other day, man. I remember I screenshotted that thing, but it was like a year's difference, I believe, in physique wise. Right? I was like, whoa, like that is crazy. Like that is, and like again, like the way my brain works, it's like because I have to, like the lighting, like I always take that into consideration, like the small differences in like how you were posed, but nevertheless, it was pretty unanimous. And one thing about you, Brian, is that like, every time we're at the headquarters, like you're very, it's like, man, it's like this dude is like just inspired and so happy to be here and then to go do the work. And I think that is something that, I'm not married, but like I've seen it with like my like friends that have either been married or in a relationship for a long time. It's like, bro, you don't even like do this thing for her anymore. And it's like, and all that stuff, like it matters, man. Like the daydreaming, the imagination, the the whole like there is no limit sort of a deal and mindset. Like that is like my best training and some of my best progress, like whether it's the beginner, the intermediate, or like now in this pickle that I find myself in, has been under the setting of me just being super excited, amped up, and optimistic, and perhaps a little bit of that placebo effect thrown in there as well.
Well, thank you, dude. I appreciate that.
One thing I wanted to add on to the back of that, and everything you said, Brian and I have had these discussions many times. I feel I'm a little bit younger than you guys. I'm 34, but I feel no different about training now than I did when I was, 14, 15. I'm just as excited. If I have a day off, if my girlfriend's away and I have the entire day to myself, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to eat breakfast, and I'm going to go to the fucking gym. Like that's the highlight of my day type of thing. And it's really just like that desire of exploring and seeing what the possibilities are. And one thing that I find myself of is there's a lot of information, especially around naturals approaching your, genetic ceiling and things of like, yeah, well, all your gains are behind you. You can only put on X amount of muscle, and that's what the research says. And, like, to kind of quote what you said, is like, it might be better to find a new hobby type of thing, right? For the time investment. But the thing that always comes back to me is like, but what if it's wrong? Right? What if it's just like there's limitations in what's been studied. They're not studying the right type of people. Like I don't know that those people do what I do, and I just want to explore, like, what if they're wrong, right? What if I can, get to a little bit over that kind of that high end of that, what is it, like the 25 number on like the fat-free mass index, right? If I can get to 25.5, like how cool would that be? If I get to 26, how cool would that be? Like, even though it may be far-fetched, it still keeps me excited to go just for the possibility of like, what if I could be better or different or something like that. I love that.
For sure. All part of the process and the journey, you know? Cool. Let's do quick nutrition stuff. You had a question that you wanted to get at?
Yeah. So I know I wanted to ask you, Berto, like, do you, when you're prepping, right? Obviously you have this big long prep coming up. Do you kind of, and we already kind of briefly alluded to this, but I just wanted to touch on it again. Is there anything that you do in your approach that maybe strays from what the research says around like protein intake or carbohydrate intake? Because I know, for example, Chris Barakat was on a podcast. Oh man, this is like a year ago or so. And I know like the literature generally says about like 2.3 to 3.1 grams per lean kilogram of lean body mass. But he was saying that like, oh yeah, but when I diet, and I don't want to like put words in someone else's mouth. I believe he said 240 to 250 grams of protein, and he was around like 180, 185 pounds, which is significantly higher than what the research generally supports. So I just wanted to ask, is there any approaches that you take that maybe deviate from what that might say?
Yeah. Well, my protein's probably around there as a just in case as well. There's that satiating factor, right? But then also, when you look at what are the consequences, right, for eating it, it's like, okay, it's like at worst, it's benign at that level, right? It's like there's still enough of the other macros to train like a bodybuilder. So I do something similar there, but I'd say probably if there is one thing I do that's I think a little out there, it's probably going to be some of my carb cycling strategies. Like usually towards the end of a prep is I'm getting ready to land the damn thing. I will have more high calorie days than low calorie days in a week. So basically say 7 days, three of those days are like hypocaloric, and then the other ones are at about maintenance. And a lot of that is just I think a lot of the plateaus that people hit are just they're inflammation based. So it's a very stressful environment once you get put into the single digits, in a combination of training life, all that. Like I feel that my body is just so much more transparent when I have ratios that look like that. My digestive tract also a little bit more regular, which is going to help with sorting out what the scale might be telling me. So that's probably one thing, is that once I get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm very close to that goal, I am careful about how we land the plane. Probably a little bit too careful, given how, according to what science says and what does make sense, that it is hard to lose muscle. But I think it's a little bit different when we're talking about single digit body fat and then an athlete who is very close to their ceiling. I think it's actually almost kind of easy to do so, in fact. So yeah, I tread carefully around those waters usually.
I really, really like that. I think it comes back to kind of what we talked about before. It's just like application, individualization and that sort of thing was the literature on, advanced natural bodybuilders during peak week type thing. No, it may have limited applicability outside of that population.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I get to work with a good little population. Like from my perspective, it's like these are subjects that like talk about adherence. Like they're pretty dead on, and I'm pretty fortunate in that regard. And again, super unique situation. There's not a whole lot of people that are in like the single digit. Like when I tell people that, hey man, like Usain Bolt is probably like rocking double digits, but they're like that makes no. So yeah, like we are we're like straight up emaciating people here, and this is one of those things where like I don't think there's going to be a lot of research that is, as someone who preps people for shows, like there's going to be for quite a while, I feel. So experience really trumps this one.
I have a question not super related to the conversation, but just curious about how you handle carbs in the final week for the majority of your athletes. Like, do you find more people are front loaded, more people are back loaded, or more people are mid loaded, or whatever you would call it? Or how do you, what's the general success with that?
So ideally, I don't want to be using peak weeks. There's so much, only so much you can do in a week's time to have someone look a little bit better after you just like, you literally just beat the shit out of them for like 5-6 months, you know? So a week might not do a whole lot, might do some things for some people, but usually, yeah, it's quite unpredictable. What worked, yeah, one peak week, it's like 4 weeks later, now they're in a leaner state, they've been through some more stuff, and it might not respond nearly as well. So if an athlete gives me enough time, what I like to do is get them to the point where I am building food back up. And it's wonderful because you literally get to the point where it's like, man, I can compete Wednesday at 3 in the morning and I look great. You know, you just look good all the time. And a lot of the stress that the athlete might be feeling from their environment, like it's still there. Like they think they're pretty normal. Like towards the end of it, they're like, oh, "I feel great." And it's like, nah, your family still hates you right now, you know. But it's not as like it is omnipresent of a sensation anymore. So and it shows in their physique. I do think a lot of the negative symptoms that come from contest prepping, like I feel like a lot of those are in your head almost, where it's especially like my type A's that like they're really having these chats with themselves like all day that tend to suffer the most, and we need to undo more things as we get out of there. But yeah, ideally, I'd like to get a person to the point where they've been eating at maintenance for, I'd say, at least a month, 2 months, probably better, and just have a string of shows just plop there, and we don't have to depend on the peak week. It's more of a just hydration and fluid thing that we're trying to balance as we make it onto the stage. So that would be my ideal setup.
And so you build that into the timeline now for all of your athletes.
If it's logistically feasible for them, it's like, okay, like this is what I would like to do. This is going to require about 30 weeks of your time. Can you do this for me? And if they can't, you know, we can go with the traditional peak week and just do it that way. Because still 20 weeks is a lot of time, man. To ask someone to like, hey, let's kind of dedicate this part of your life that you really enjoy to this one specific goal. Like even if you're a bodybuilder, like even like for me right now, I know that my excitement's like 11 out of 10, but right around October, November, it's like I'm still gonna be in a very happy place because I'm doing exactly what I want to do, but I'm definitely gonna need some texture in my life at that point.
Yep. Aaron, anything to add?
No, I get that though.
Yeah, no, I agree too. I think if I ever do this to stage thing, I'm certainly going to try and do that. But it'll be my first time, you know, so I'll probably fuck it up. But one of the things I actually am curious about that I think will probably help our audience too is I've heard you discuss the importance of lighting and consistency in lighting in your pictures. And you have a statement that I've heard you say before a couple times that's like, you know that if you look good in this lighting, that those gains are yours. Like you got those, you know? So I think that I remember you saying that lighting was supposed to come from behind you. Right? Is that right? It comes from behind you level, and then the camera's also level. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's the good old windowsill. Basically, light source, camera, and then you. So the camera's in between you and the light source. Because, yeah, with the side lighting, like, yeah, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but quads look pretty good, and like the sides of your abs. So any sort of lines that are vertical, they're gonna really shine. And then if you're overhead, it's like all the lines, like your pecs, for example, like they're going to look extra good. Your abs are going to look extra good. But if the light's behind the camera and you're in front of the camera, it's great because all the little things that might be subtle, it's like no, like they are truly there. Like it doesn't matter. Like the day, the lighting. So for me, in that lighting, like glute striations, they look a little fadey. It looks like, oh, okay, you might be like 1990s lean. But then you get up on that stage and it's like, it's all there. So I'd much rather, yeah, do it that way where, it looks like it's questionably there, but I know that questionable in that lighting means like, no, it's 100% there. Whereas like, you know how it goes with like the overhead or the side lighting. It's like, this looks good, but I don't know if I look like this like all the time. But that is something I think worth splitting hairs over because, at the end, like data, numbers, measurements, all that stuff is great, but we're going for a look, right? So, if your arms haven't moved in 3 years, but they look a lot better, it's like, who cares? Who cares? So that, yeah, I'd say that, and learning the bodybuilding front and back relaxed poses. I think that's all I ask from my athletes, and the reason for that is because once you nail them, they're hard to mess up. Whereas like you take a back double bicep, like you might have been like bent over back a little bit more, your arms might have been a bit higher or lower, and that's enough to the point where it can change like what's going on there. Like you might have your arms just like an inch lower. So it's like, oh, my back is thicker. And it's like, no, you just changed the pose. So rear relax, front relax. I think if most people learn those, they don't take very long to learn, and they're super easy to get consistent. So that plus the good lighting, like I have this whole private folder. It's like stuff I never post. It's just literally like just my physique, and it's always in those poses because again, if something changes in the front relax, back relax, kind of like with that lighting, it's like, okay, that's yours, you earned that, rest assured that that's actually there.
And you mentioned the window, but do you have a preference as whether it's natural light or manufactured light? Because if it's natural, then you kind of have to do like same time of day and stuff like that too, right?
Yeah, there's some changes in the color of the lighting. It could be a little bit blue, kind of depending on what time of the day it is. But I would with the window because people will always like have excuses as to like why they can't get me the pictures the way I want them. And it's like, dude, unless you live in a house without windows, like this is like you have access to a window, right? So I like those nowadays. I like those rings a little bit more. That people use like to be in front of cameras, but anything goes. I think it's more so about that order of lighting. But yeah, no, to me, man, it's with my athletes, it's like I want videos of your physique and I want videos of your training because again, it's like it's a visual sport at the end. Like maybe I don't know, my dumbbell presses haven't gotten necessarily stronger, but like the way I do them, and like we were talking about, the way I hold the muscle to the fire, like now compared to a few years ago is vastly different. So yeah, I guess it's a unique hobby sport because it's a sport slash science slash art, if you will. But yeah, I think the visual data way more important than anything else.
I had a quick question follow up on that, just because to make sure for myself and the listeners. So with the ordering of the lighting, let's say you're doing a front relaxed pose. Is it the light is behind the window, right? So obviously the camera will be in front of the window and then you are facing the window. Am I correct there? Okay, cool. And then the one thing you said that I really liked and wanted to bring up is that we'll have different conversations with people who are like super into measurements and stuff. And one of the things that I always find difficult is the measurements assume a similar level of body fat percentage. So I know something that would like really mess me up for a while was I have this, excuse me, measurement of my quads or my legs when they were like the thickest, but I was probably like 22% body fat when I had them and I weighed, 220 pounds, where now they're like half an inch smaller, but I weigh 30 pounds less and I'm, walk around at 10 to 12% body fat. So it's always like one of those things like if you are using some of those, I guess more objective measurements, you have to make sure you're leveling the playing field and not measuring your arms when you were 15% body fat. And then again, when you were, 11 or 12, because they will change because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, super. Like, yeah, man. I think off season I was rocking close to 17, I think. And I know by the time I get on the stage, it's going to be like 16-inch arms. So yeah. One thing I will say, I think because, I think we all here go through like gaining and cutting cycles. Just measurements, I do think at like both ends is something I would recommend. As much as I say that, hey, like lighting and like if you see it, that's good enough for me. Measurements can definitely help you in between, just in regards to like dropping hints that what you are doing is actually working.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you ever do DEXA scans, or it's kind of irrelevant because you go by the look more or less?
I did one a few years ago, and that was more so because I knew I was going to get a number that I didn't know what I was going to get. So that was the main reason. So it would not from a curiosity standpoint, but more so it's like, okay, I look like someone who's ready to get up on that stage, and I think I'm going to get a number that's going to be conflicting with a lot of people. So it was more so to just simply bring up that point. I do want to go get one again, but more so for I think just health reasons. I want to see where my bone density is at, like more than anything else. But no, never done those. And these days more than ever, like I go by what my eye is telling me. It's to the point where I think this prep I want to like not weigh myself the whole way. Like I'm thinking of just. So last prep, the milestone was I didn't really track. I just kind of ate, and I know how like shitty I should feel from here to here. It's kind of like with training with you guys. It's like when you're doing too much. You know when maybe you should have taken that set or made this change or whatever, right? Or even have gone into the gym, right? And so the same thing with dieting. And like I want to maybe try doing it without the scale because I think sometimes the scale will make me do things that maybe I shouldn't be doing. So yeah, we'll see. That's a big one.
That was actually going to be one of the things I brought up because I know that you did it last time without tracking calories. Did you end up tracking at the very end, like as you got close?
Well, I guess to be perfectly clear, I was tracking, but there was no set numbers. It was just more so on like how my day was flowing, how, where I was from a recovery standpoint, how well I was losing. So, sometimes I'd look at my phone, 7 p.m. I'm like, okay, you've had enough, buddy. Like, that's it. We're done eating. That sort of deal. And especially on refeed days, that really came in handy because I wanted to make sure that I was getting enough. So yeah, I needed somewhere to just keep track of, I guess, the bank account, but I wasn't necessarily on like a specific budget. But yeah, the scale, like it's a great tool, but I think sometimes kind of like with you right now, like it can get to the point where it's like it almost becomes solely about that thing and the number as opposed to like what might be going on and you might be missing out on that.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, just based off like feel and kind of knowledge of what I'm putting in my body, I probably wouldn't adjust my calories. But because the scale is like 2.2 pounds up, I'm like, I don't know, got to take the calories down now. So maybe I'll be a little bit more patient and see how it plays out for a few more days. Aaron, anything else on that?
No, not really. I mean, for me, it makes so Berto, a little background. I'm just incredibly objective based. It's just how I live my life. And it's like, I'm kind of, when you guys are talking, off kind of daydreaming about like, oh, well, what happens if I could, do that? And I'm like, I couldn't. Like my skin was literally crawling just thinking about not having the data. And I'm like, I could never do it.
Yeah, I totally feel that, man. I could see that with you too. So I guess I only have really like one or two more small things to talk about, but you kind of alluded to earlier when you were talking about your arm and delt training, how you suspect that the volume's going to continue going down here. And so I assume that that is kind of an insinuation that when you cut and your calories, are minimal, that you do tend to take more of a bit of a low volume, I assume higher effort approach to training.
I meant more so like in the long term, like my career. Like one thing, I guess I look at Jeff Alberts and my colleague and friend and I look at his training. And a few years ago, I'm like, that makes no sense. Like why? Who does, I don't know, 8 sets and calls it a day? That's how he trains. And I do think he's just a hyper responder. You see his little boy, like his little boy's he's ripped and he's got all the muscles already, so there's a genetic
He's
component
like 7,
for sure. Yeah. But also at the same time, like as much as I'm maybe in tune with like the eating part, like Jeff, like he's always been really in tune with that. Like you talk about a guy that does not improvise at all when it comes to like technique, like no matter how hard it gets. So I'm starting to see that. And I'm like, man, that's an important part of like, as we talk, mastering bodybuilding is being able to, as things get a little crazy, just being able to not deviate from form. So I think as I get better at that, I get better with, my just knowledge of what is good technique on, set exercise and then being able to execute that. I think I'm going to eventually just drive volume downwards even more. And I think to me, that's been probably the thing the last 2 years it's been most worth exploring, because there was a time where, man, I was doing like Arnold type workouts. And I almost felt like if I wasn't in this haze of systematic fatigue, even though muscle growth is like this very localized adaptation, like I felt that, okay, I'm not growing. Like there just had to be a certain baseline of shitty that I had to roll around with in order for me to be like, okay, like there's favorable turnover going on right now. But the last 2 years, it's been a great lesson in that. No, it absolutely doesn't have to be that way. Because during that leg, I would ask myself, I'm like, man, what are you going to feel like? How are you going to train, like going into your 30s and going into your 40s? And now I think more than ever, I am really confident that, hey, not a whole lot's going to change. Not a whole lot's going to change. Like as I get into my 40s and my 50s, and to me that's really important, because hey, like I've been training most of my life at this point, and it's something that is it's a very special ritual to me at this point, and it really centers and anchors the rest of my life. So to be able to say that I can confidently say that this is going to be around in a very similar manner for 1 decade, 2 decades, who knows, maybe even 3 decades. It's I guess it's been worth it, taking those risks and like trying these new things and getting out of my comfort zone. So that's probably more than the physique changes that we might have seen. We'll see. We'll confirm that in a few months if they're actually there. Or maybe it was just the lighting. That's probably been the best part. The fact that, okay, it's like, okay, I think I figured out a way to do this for a really, really long time.
Yeah, I love that. I resonate super hard with that. And I actually find myself the same way. I know Aaron's kind of been the same too, where we've both kind of gradually over the last like 4 or 5 years, we've seen our volumes decline. And I think that that's as much related to it's probably mostly related to us just getting better at movement, like we were discussing earlier, being more acute with our execution, choosing better exercises that allow us to do the job, a little bit more specifically. And as I believe that I'm going to continue getting better at movement as we all kind of try to become the Jeff Alberts version of ourselves, I think that we'll probably all kind of see our volumes begin to move down a little bit. And I actually wonder, and this kind of is a little bit of a tangent, but I wonder really whether, you know, when you cut volume 50% or whatever, if that really is just like, oh, now I'm just maintaining type thing, or whether like, you know, we'll actually continue to see like a little bit of progress with volumes that the research might say shouldn't be actually working for us.
Yeah, yeah. You know what, like off topic, but you know, since we're all like in very similar situations, I have asked myself this question, and that is if I couldn't make any more progress, like if like for sure it was just like, okay, you're done, like that's it. It's like, would you still train? And as crazy as it sounds, it's like, yeah, like absolutely. And like so much of this is there's just very few things and places in life. Like whenever I get a fanboy, it's like, bro, you have no idea. Like I suck at so many things, dude. Like you would, if you only knew. But when it comes to like the weight room, it's like I walk in there and I feel like this is like an ecosystem that like I've mastered, and it's like a celebration of all those like late nights, like deep in some like bodybuilding form. So to me, yeah, it's like I don't know, it's like a celebration of life as much as it is trying to, you know, progress.
It's a privilege that we get to do it.
One thing that I think, Brian, did you have any more questions before I went on?
Nah, man, you're good. Go for it.
Okay. So a couple things I really like you said there, and I think it's a really great way to kind of wrap up from a high level, right, approach of going from advanced to elite. One word that you said, Berto, that I really, really liked is anchor. And why? I mean, this is a little bit of personal bias, but it was something that I have been recently using. I kind of hurt my low back a couple weeks ago, and I had to basically like take like 10 days off of training because I was like, well, I can't even like brace to do any, you know, lat stuff. And after like a couple days, you know, 5, 6 days go by, like my mood was just off, and I wasn't inspired to like do my work. And I was really just like, I wasn't much of like myself. And this has happened 1 or 2 times. I'm like, training is an anchor of who I am and how I live my life. And at this point, I know my days of making my best gains are behind me. I might be able to squeeze out some more, who knows? But even if I didn't make any more gains, like I would always continue training because it is an anchor of my life in who I am. And while I'm, you know, getting into a little bit older age and health in general is becoming more of a priority, it maintains that. And I have like this goal is like, I feel great. I feel better at 34 than I did at 24 and 26 and 27. Like my joints are happy, you know, minus that little fucking back thing I just talked about. But like, I want to feel like this for the next 20 years. And I truly believe that there's no reason that I can't, as long as I continue doing this. And I think it's just like an anchor of who you are, ecosystem, you know, that environment just allows you to thrive and be the best version of you. And I think that's like a really, really just fantastic point that you brought up that I know resonates with Brian and myself like really, really hard.
Yeah, man, it's a privilege to be able to have found something in this life that one loves that much and to have mastered something. Because even though we're trying to get better, we still don't know as much as we like. It's like, man, it's like, no, like this is definitely, you're at that level of mastery. And again, a big symptom of that is that we're so concerned with what we might still not know and might not live long enough to know and practice said things. So yeah, it's almost like a form of like enlightenment. And I guess I'm not a religious person, but it kind of connects the dots in regards to like why certain people like use those as anchors and how that helps them be the person they want to be outside of you know, of that. So yeah, no, it just becomes so much more. And I guess in a way, I would not I wouldn't trade places, man, with like, I don't know, myself like 15 years ago, because like where I'm at now, I don't know. It's like I can see things much more clearly.
Yeah, we talked a lot, or actually on one of the episodes, about whether our high school self would be proud of where we are right now. And I think that, we all look at ourselves and we're like, man, like we've really achieved our 15-year-old's dream right now, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So generally how we wrap up, Berto, can you provide some more information for the listeners where they can find you, social media channels, website, etc. And then for any guys out there, do you prep women as well for national shows or just men?
No, we work with both men and women. Yeah.
Okay. So if you would like to if you're listening, would like to get on stage and would like to reach out to Berto, can you provide them information for that, please?
So it's 3dmusclejourney.com. And if you haven't peeped us yet, we're quite active on YouTube. We're all quite active on Instagram. But 3dmusclejourney.com, you'll find the links to, the social media of all the coaches and whatever courses we might be popping off with. But that's our central home for everything.
Yep. Thank you so much for being with us, man.
Sure.
Hey, my pleasure. Yeah, not a whole lot of people I can talk with.
I'll put all that in the show notes. Thank you, Berto.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.